Admiral Stufflebeam, thank you for joining me on Leadership in a Crisis. Throughout your military career, you, of course, lived in an environment that was constantly planning for crisis situations as they arose. Can you share with those of us who haven't had your military experience a process that you went through to develop an appropriate strategy to deal with crisis? And I know that you've got a program that you call ROSLCC. Maybe you could explain to us what that is and why it's so important to have this kind of framework and structure as we navigate our way through what is now a global pandemic.
ROSLCC is an acronym that military people want to use often to keep a process straight in our heads. It's a process that's been tried and true to the military for eons. And it's almost an antithesis to what the legal profession and certainly the political profession, how they want to conduct business. So it starts out ROSLCC, ROSLCC. So I say it to myself 3 times with my eyes closed, and I can visualize the letters. 1, it's recognition of what the crisis is. What's the crux of it? And maybe as importantly, starting to look for to recognize the opportunities that are in the challenge. And then O for the outcome. In any crisis or in any planning of a serious endeavor, you have to have a vision for what the end state is going to be, knowing that you can never just go back to the way it was. You don't get a do-over. But what is that outcome supposed to be? And that's one of the things that probably is a hallmark of military planning, is always deciding up front what it is you want that outcome to look like. Then you have to reverse engineer a series of steps to get from where you are to where you want to be. Most importantly, not the most important of the steps, but most importantly at this point is recognizing the value and the primacy of communicating. You've got to communicate multiple ways. You've got to communicate in many times. You really cannot over-communicate to be able to get buy-in. You've got to create a leadership team or fall in on a set of go-to people that you have to be able to get more people to come and join this vision. And then lastly, you've got to measure the progress that you've been making in those steps towards your outcome to determine, when does the culture change? When can I let off the gas pedal? That is a nutshell for how we plan military operations or crises.
So when you are in that environment, even in peacetime, are you constantly scanning the horizon for potential hazards and opportunities? Because there is no real opportunity in life to relax and sit back and just hope that it's all going to work out.
I'll start it from a military frame of reference, because when you're not involved in operations deployed downrange, you are in a state of training, preparing to do that, or you've just come back from deployment and you are resetting, and you've got to get those planning skills back up to speed so that whatever your missions can be, that you are practiced at doing those. Since I've retired and moved into my civilian life, where I don't do any more work with the military, what I find is that process is extremely valuable in the business world. And I'm constantly reminded, as I look at businesses when I'm asked to come in and do some consulting for them, how ill-prepared many leaders are for a crisis, because they're coming at us at a rate almost too fast to absorb. For instance, today down in USA, we have this pandemic sweeping across America, and at the same time, severe weather has spawned a number of tornadoes, and we have a number of states with horrendous emergencies ongoing at the exact same time. So put yourself in that governor's seat. There's a lot to deal with, and you need to have a discipline, a perseverance, and a process to be able to work through it.
So you're saying, as a business, no matter what size you are, you also need to be constantly aware of what all those threats, challenges, and opportunities are that are just beyond your view.
Absolutely the case. And the more that I have studied business, I can't say that I have a firsthand experience of running a business other than my own, But I have been around large corporations as big as the Lockheed Martin Aerospace Corporation, or as small as a less than 500 person private company in Silicon Valley, and with a number of NFL clubs. And they all experience the same thing. It really doesn't matter the what has happened, because something does happen. It either happens with your people, because of your people, or to your people, or to your product or service. And so the question becomes is, how are you as a leader prepared to deal with it when you really cannot anticipate all of the things that are going to come at you?
So as a leader, I noticed that in your list, you also talk about the fact that you have to have the ability to lead, but also to assemble the appropriate leadership team. What are some of the characteristics of a leader first that are vitally important in a crisis? And then what is it they need to take into mind when they're assembling their own leadership team?
So for the pinnacle leader, for the person who's most responsible and that who would be held accountable for what's going to be an outcome of what happens of this enterprise, the first thing that I believe that a leader has to have is perseverance, the ability to stick with it regardless of how difficult it may be. I believe almost as important is a sense of calm, because without that, the emotions start to well up and then the fight or flight reality of fear starts to kick in. And I think that the only way that you can suppress that is to swallow that fear and not allow it to take you over. So a sense of calm. And if nothing else, when you appear to be calm to others, it helps calm them as well. So those are two very strong attributes that I think that a leader must possess to be successful. Beyond that, a leader, I think, would be most successful if they will consider not so much what it is that they are responsible for, but what their team is responsible for, or their organization. I often thought as a military commander that there were a lot of people who answered to me, but that I worked for them. And my prime responsibility was to ensure that they had the resources to get the job done, because no leader ever gets it done by him or herself. It's always done by a group of people. So it's giving those people the resources, which may even be a sense of calm in a storm, that I think is very important. The second part of your question has to do with building or utilizing a team. In every organization, there is a bell curve of performers. There are those at the high end who are your go-to people. They're ones that you always will count on to be there regardless of what's going to happen. And then there are some others that they won't necessarily meet their own potential or your expectations, and you can't let them undo or get in the way of the things that the doers can accomplish. So now what happens is that you have to put those go-to people together and get them to buy into your vision as a leader for what you want this outcome to be. And then their job is going to be working on the middle of that bell curve with all those other people who are trying to figure out which way up is, to get them, if you will, on the bus.
You know, as you're explaining all this, I realize that as a leader, you also have to have an intimate knowledge and understanding of your organization and your team. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your team? What can your company do? Where are you vulnerable? How do you make adjustments? Even still, as we move into a crisis where there are so many unknown unknowns, you have to make decisions that at times become instinctive. That's a challenging position. How do you fight your way through that, knowing that there is a level of uncertainty?
I think there are several helpful aids that can kind of get you through that. The first is never shy away from a challenge, because with each challenge, and especially if it's a crucible, especially if it is very emotionally draining and difficult, one is it makes you stronger, and two, it makes you a much more knowledgeable or aware of what your limitations are. I have come to realize that failure is actually a very good thing, as long as it doesn't cause total collapse or cause anybody harm. Failure helps you stretch and determine what your limits are, and you want to be able to stretch those limits out. So each time that I found myself in a crucible, I thought deliberately about how is it making me stronger? How am I going to be better because of this? And each time that a successive crisis came into view, I found myself better prepared for it. Now, at some point, it's going to be overwhelming. And when it is, there are two things that I believe are critical. One is to recognize there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that's one bite at a time.
Right.
And it's critically important for a leader to be able to digest this problem into smaller parts and figure out which are the ones to get at first. Because once you can do the first, even with the unknown unknowns, you start to fill in what's going to follow as a more natural cause. And the other thing is that as you start to work through a crisis, especially one that you're not yet prepared for, one of the best questions to ask yourself and to ask of others is, when do we have to decide? Many people in a subordinate position love to hear from their leaders to say, look, you can solve my problem if you just tell me what to do right now. But what if I don't know what to do as a leader? And then when I'm in that situation, what I'm interested to find out is, well, when do we have to decide? Where is that red line that we're going to have to get at?
So one of the other things that I think is important in a leadership team, and maybe you can tell me if I'm right here, is that your team has to respect you as the leader. How vital of a component is that, and how do you build that respect, especially in a moment of crisis?
Well, it's actually relatively easy to build in the military because you're sometimes faced with life and death situations. And people who are going to go into combat recognize that if you're going to have to do something towards or at somebody, it can be done at or towards you. So it really does become a life or death thing. So how do you get them to do that? Rule number one is you have to earn the trust. And how do you build and earn the trust? Well, first of all, as you had previously noted, you have to know your organization. You have to know its strengths and weaknesses. You have to know who your go-to people are. You have to know who are those that you're going to have to be most attentive to and carry along, because they may not have the strength to be able to push out in front of you. So having that willingness to give of yourself, which includes opening yourself up, even to doubt, and letting people see that, allows them to trust you more. And the more that you build that trust, the more there will be willing to follow you, even when you're not sure what's going to be happening next. And there were times in my difficult crucibles where I confessed to the people that I was close to at that moment and said, I just don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm not exactly sure what the right course of action is. So what are your ideas? Letting people in, understanding maybe some of your vulnerability, but it makes you a stronger and more empowered leader because you trust them. They in turn return that trust in you as respect.
You know, one of the other things that happens in a crisis is, of course, you're going to have naysayers. You're going to have people who say, I don't think it's going to work out. There's this problem and there's that problem. In a circumstance or an environment where we don't have a looming crisis, or we're in the midst of a crisis the way we are right at the moment with the COVID-19 crisis, you might say, yeah, okay, like all you're doing is bringing me down. But right now, is there some value in hearing people who bring up potential pitfalls or identify where there may be a weakness in the organization? Because without understanding that fully, you may be moving in a direction that could present other problems. So not that I want to embrace naysayers, but I also want to say there are times when you have to say, okay, I'm willing to listen to that, but then you work on engineering your way around that potential problem. Do I have that right?
You do. And the techniques that I have observed and the techniques that I have used that have been successful in dealing with a naysayer is, one, underreact. There are people who will run into your office with their proverbial hair on fire, and what they really want to do is to light you up and get you as excited as they are. And when you underreact and watch them kind of go through their rant or their difficult series of questions, it kind of takes some wind out of the sails when they realize that you're just going to remain calm for this. The second thing that I have found that is useful is to start asking penetrating questions. Always the first question when lost of all else is why? Why do you think this won't work? Why do you see this as a roadblock? What do you see is the way to get around this? And you pretty quickly determine, is this somebody who just wants to be a malcontent and a troublemaker, if you will, because they won't have answers for those. For others, they will probably become more circumspect, more thoughtful, and help think through, maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And maybe they start to come around to see where you are. But at the end of the day, it's a responsibility of a leader to get that organization inspired and motivated to go into the vision that you have got going. So you will have to disregard naysayers at some point.
By employing the response that you have suggested, I can't help but feel that you also establish even further your authority in the moment as being an appropriate decision maker.
It has worked for me that way, and it's worked for others that whom I've admired and watched their particular leadership styles. What I had the opportunity to do and work with a very famous politician once in my life, and what I observed about what he was doing to some very strong-willed personalities that were barking at him from one side or the other was he basically kind of brought them in. He made them part of a discussion of where are we going to go with this? And in the process of that, he kind of disarmed them. And he certainly disarmed them in front of others without embarrassing them, without denigrating or talking down to them, but asking a series of penetrating questions and remaining calm, underreacting. I could see where this was starting to sort of cause this problem to melt away. And sooner or later, they get tired. If they can't get you whipped into the same level of frenzy that they've come into you with, they get tired and eventually just say, you know what, I got an appointment, I really got to go.
So no matter what situation we find ourselves in, the landscape is constantly changing. So while we may recognize early and come up with a desired outcome, how important is it that we remain ever vigilant to the changing circumstances and have a flexible approach and develop new plans where necessary?
I think of it a little bit differently because when I think about planning for something or even an eventuality, what I take into account first is that whatever we're going to do, it's going to be about us as people. We start with the basic unit of work, dialogue. And we start to build off that dialogue as the basic unit of work and realize that it's going to be a network of our relationships that are going to make this thing happen or not happen. And when we do that, or at least when I do that, I find it doesn't matter if I'm talking to NFL football players or if I'm talking to military people or talking to civilian business owners. It ends up being the process ends up being the same. And the only variables are just those things you have no control over that come at you from the outside. I've tried to teach myself, I'm only going to worry about those things that I can control and not the things that I can't. Now, I certainly have to take those things into account, but where do I have control? And I think that's the important part, is internalize that part of it.
One last point that I want to emphasize, because I remember in discussions that we've had in years past, you talked about how vitally important it is that your communication be clear. It's not what you think you're saying, but you're ensuring that you're being heard the way you intended. In a crisis, how important is that?
Critical, which is why it's part of my little acronym that I keep in my head, ROSLCC. You cannot over-communicate. When somebody comes back to you and says, boss, I'm choking on this stuff, can we move on? Then you're almost there. But getting it to every single person in your organization responsible to carry out is still going to take time, still going to take effort. And, oh, by the way, people come and go. And so you kind of start the ball over from that perspective. But there's another aspect to that I think is important. Give me your question again, because all of a sudden I just went off track about that.
Well, the question about the need to be able to ensure that what is being understood and heard is what you intended to be heard.
Gotcha. So I learned almost the hard way that the worst question in the English language is, do you understand? Because there's only one answer to that one, and it's never going to work for everybody else. And when I turned that question kind of sideways and asked them, do you have enough? It gave them a chance to come back to ask more. I recognize, and I can't remember where I read this, but I studied it some years ago, and I became a believer that in the world of communication, you have to ask enough questions the right way to get feedback on what it is that you're hoping to transmit. Because the responsibility of communicating doesn't rest with the transmitter. It rests with the receiver. And so the question really becomes is, what does the receiver get? And I love the old anecdotal story about Napoleon. Napoleon had a young corporal who would shine his boots, take care of his horse and meals and everything else. And Napoleon would get frustrated during the battles in the way that they conducted them in those days. And he would write orders and send them out to the field generals to say, I want you to do this and want you to do that. And it wouldn't happen. And he said, something is not going on here. So he started to write down what his orders would be in a way that he hoped even a corporal would understand it. Then he brought in his corporal and said, read this. And the guy would start to read out loud and go, no, just absorb it. And then tell me what it says. Don't read it back to me. Tell me what it says. And the corporal would read it back to him. And if that wasn't it, he'd take it back from him and erase it out and put another line down and say, now tell me what this says. When Napoleon's corporal got it right, it was ready for prime time with his generals. And he maintained this Napoleon's corporal, which any of us could look it up on Google and find out what is a Napoleon's corporal. It's a confidant. It's somebody who can help communicate back what you want that intent to be.
So that level of communication takes a lot of work. Every single aspect of leadership in a crisis requires a lot of work. There is no opportunity here to sit back and relax. In these moments of crisis, I think that we have to embrace an extraordinary work ethic. That's what will get us through this.
Absolutely. And these constant updates are good as long as you are able to describe the progress. So what you need to be doing inside of your process is not only developing the steps that you want to go from where you are to where you want to be, you have to ensure that the words and the actions match so that there's going to be a consistency between the two. And then you're going to have to communicate it in ways that let me show you the progress. Let me help you understand a series of small wins that in the aggregate will start to change the culture so we can prevail in the war.
You actually just brought up one point that I realized that we didn't touch on that you indicated in your ROSLCC acronym, and that is to be able to identify when the culture is changing and to declare when that has happened.
It is easy for a leader to start to see progress. And in that progress, believe we're over the hump. We're now on the downhill side, and it's going to start to roll automatically. That can be a fatal mistake. And that's the importance of perseverance and continuing to measure the progress and then report back on it in communication. And you need to go out and find at the furthest reaches of your responsibility and the span of the accountability that ultimately you'll be held accountable to, and to find out, is it really second nature now for us to absorb these steps and change what we were doing that caused us to win? So at the end of it all, when you go back to the very beginning to say, what's the desired outcome? A leader's got to stay focused on that outcome, have that vision, and got to keep refreshing that vision to his go-to team or to his entire organization and showing where they are. So in football parlance, you have to know where you are on the field, and you have to know where the goal line is to determine the right plays at the right time to get you there.
Well, thank you for this very insightful and in-depth discussion about the role of leadership that's based or rooted in your experience, first in the U.S. Navy, and then in your experience as a consultant to a wide range of organizations, including NFL football teams. Thank you very much, Admiral Stufflebeam.
A delight to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity.